development in the traditional sense doesn't work. It used to be that trade liberalization, more investment in education, there was a belief that this would lead to development in and of itself. In fact, we know that's not the case. This may trigger more economic growth, but this economic growth is not sustainable without quality jobs. The report concludes that quality jobs is what is needed in order to enhance development. When there are more efforts to improve formality of enterprises, to give access to poor people to key resources, to improve productivity in the agricultural sector, to make sure that the revenues from natural resources, from oil, from gas, are invested in the real economy rather than being just rents which are then exported in terms of financial capital. If this is done, then it produces more development, and we have plenty of examples around the world about that. Take the case of Malaysia, for example. Malaysia was an agricultural economy in the early 60s, and Malaysia diversified its economies, connecting the small export sector to the rest of the economy, rather than letting small products driving the whole economy, and also try to formalize employment and address inequalities. And all the efforts combined with more education produce more quality jobs and therefore sustain development. Malaysia today is an emerging economy. In the 60s, it was one of the poorest economies in the world. Take the case more recently of Brazil. Brazil also was a natural resource dominated economy, but it invested in the manufacturing sector. It tried to promote social protection and therefore development in rural areas, and the result has been broader based development and therefore more sustainable growth. And employment will continue to rise in the next few years. We estimate that we have more than 200 million unemployed people today, but this will continue to rise in the next few years. Not as much as predicted in January, because there is some more economic growth in advanced economies, but still some more unemployment will happen, unfortunately. I think one very important fact is that there is much more turbulence in world markets, and this is affecting developing countries disproportionately. There was a lot of capital invested in those countries for a while, and now capital is withdrawing from those countries, and therefore created more instability and making quality jobs, the creation of quality jobs, more difficult in emerging and developing countries. I think that's a very important dimension of the job prospects over the next few years. Between 2000 and 2007, before the global crisis, there was a significant reduction in working poverty. People earning less than $2 a day. There was also a significant reduction in vulnerable employment, people doing unpaid family work or having vulnerable self-employed positions. For the next 5 years, we expect much less progress in this area. The incidence of vulnerable employment will remain more or less unchanged at more than 50% of total employment. So 1 in 2 jobs around the world will remain vulnerable. In addition, progress in reducing working poverty will be much less than was the case before the financial crisis. We estimate today more than 800 million people are working poor around the world. And progress will be slower because of these uncertainties in the world economy. So I think that's a very important factor to take into account. A very important employment challenge is youth unemployment. There has been a promise to young people that by studying, by engaging more in education, better training, they would get good jobs. This is not happening. The improvement in the reports in educational attainment in developing countries is very significant, very encouraging, very important, and yet youth unemployment remains unchanged or is even growing, including among young graduates. Another very important trend is new patterns in migration flows. Did you know, for example, that there is more and more south-south migration rather than south-north migration? People from developing countries going to the north. People in developing countries know that there are less opportunities in the north, and therefore they tend to migrate to other developing countries. And the report shows a very significant increase in the incidence of south-south migration. For example, migration between Tunisia and other northern African countries instead of from Tunisia to Europe. In addition, and more recently, we see north-south migration. Educated youth in Portugal, Greece, for example, migrating to developing countries because they don't have job opportunities in their countries. So of course, this is a recent phenomenon. It remains to be seen to what extent we're talking about a structural trend or just a reaction to the recession. But certainly it's a new pattern that has to be monitored and is very interesting and suggestive. I think for the ILO, the most important is to make migration an opportunity for development.